Lily, the first time I saw a photo, I was just blown away.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 95. Today I have, and I know some people will be happy to hear this, I have a male NPE willing to share his story. And I just got off a Right to Know webinar in which we actually discussed, unfortunately, not very many men in the misattributed parentage world want to or are very active in the support groups and in talking about what happened to them and finding out their parent was not their parent. And so there's a little less representation with the male gender in our world. So sometimes we get many episodes in a row where I don't have a man's perspective. Happy today that we have one. I just go in the order of emails received. And today we are speaking with Will. Hi, Will.
Hi, Lily.
I'm so happy to be doing this with you today. And I know you said you're out in the country. We'll see how our internet works for us. And we are going to go in chronological order today of your story. I know we're coming up. You said October 6th will be kind of an important date for you. So we will probably be releasing this right around your rebirth day of finding your DNA results out. But why don't you go ahead and start at the beginning and tell me what your original family was like?
I was born in November of 1969 in Fort Rucker, Alabama, at an Army base. My birth certificate father, Ray, was born and raised in Indiana. He wound up going to Vietnam in the Army, obviously. Came back to the States and was stationed in Fort Rucker, Alabama. And from what I gathered in the 1st of March of 1969, my mother, on the other hand, she was born and raised in Central Florida, and she wound up residing with her grandparents in the southeastern part of Alabama in a small town not too far from Fort Rucker. And then evidently the story I've been told growing up was that, according to my birth certificate father, Ray, he picked up my mother hitchhiking and close to the fort. Before you know it, they dated, were married in April of 69. I was born in November. Evidently they lived in Alabama for about a year until he was discharged from the Army. And then he in turn took my mother and I back home to Indiana. A couple years later, my brother was born. And then for the most part, my childhood, I'm not sure how to describe my childhood because it was good in some ways. And there were parts of it that, unfortunately, and this is by no means disrespecting my mother, but she dealt with a lot of issues, and she dealt with that with alcohol. So my childhood and early teens were just kind of sketchy at times, and there were times that I wanted to just be away from home. I spent actually a lot of time with my birth certificate father's family. I should say his mother. His parents were divorced in the early 80s, so I spent a lot of time with my birth certificate grandmother, be it summer breaks, school breaks, the fall recess, Christmas breaks, as much as I could away from home. I just never really felt comfortable at home growing up, and I quite honestly didn't have a very close relationship with Ray, and my mom either, because just for the fact that just going through episodes of um, where she would have episodes of depression and rely on alcohol to try to cure that depression, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase. It just made being at home difficult. So when that freedom of 16 and driver's license came along, I took it and ran. I worked a lot of part-time jobs and went to school, and so I tried to stay away from home as much as possible. Fortunately, in my late teens, I met a girl, and who's now my wife of almost 30 years, and we wind up having two children of our own. Pretty much for the most part, my adult life has been pretty well. It's been great, and I really couldn't ask for more when it comes to that. But so that's kind of where my life was up until the discovery of my and why I chose to reach out to Ancestry at the time.
How did you come to take a DNA test? Or I'm assuming you took a DNA test.
I did, yes. Well, it's funny because going back on my story of growing up, like I said, I never really felt close to either one of my parents, actually. And there were times growing up that, people outside the family would make remarks about how I look different than my parents. And I always just kind of felt different. I mean, it's really indescribable. I'm not sure. I've heard other NPEs describe it too as you can't describe it, as basically it. I knew that something wasn't right, and but I just kind of went with it, throughout my life. And then there were times that I would question it. Would come into question. Even my wife and I would joke about, gee, I wonder what my real parents are doing right now, because there were moments in my life I really didn't feel like either one was my true biological parent. And even remarks back then from my own mother, which makes sense now, but back then, she would say things about my physical appearance, like especially my nose. I had a different nose than my father and my mother and my brother. And matter of fact, my brother, who was born in 1972, he was younger. He was used the term spitting image, but he was a spitting image of Ray. And so there was never a doubt that those two were connected. But I wind up last summer. My wife and I were actually watching a show called DNA Detectives, and which was quite fascinating. But anyway, that during that show there was a commercial for Ancestry, and I think they were on the test was on sale at the time. And if I can backtrack a little bit, a couple years prior, just for something to do, because my two kids have grown and moved out, and I started researching both sides of the family. My mom's side, which I knew quite a bit about, just because a lot of them were really into the whole Ancestry thing. And, so I learned a lot from them. And, but then on Ray's side, I kind of knew a little bit about what, where they came from. But actually his great grandparents came over from Holland and Germany in the late 1800s and moved over close to Cincinnati. So I started doing a lot of research on that side of the family, just because, for one, I grew up in Indiana and I was close to his family, meaning Ray's family. And so I knew, where their origins were. And so anyway, back to what made me do so. My wife just said, you know what, that lingering doubt that you've had, why don't you just go ahead and send off for that DNA test just to see if anything, just put this all to rest. And so I did. And, I sent off for it. And that was probably late August. And so at that point, I was just basically waiting for those results to come in. In the meantime, we had enough going on. My daughter wound up getting married the very 1st of October. And so, we had a lot going on. So just kind of put the DNA thing to rest and for then and just waited on my results.
Will, you always had this lingering doubt in the back of your mind. It sounds like you and your wife even kind of would make jokes about what your real parents were doing.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually been a lot of NPEs that always kind of felt disconnected growing up.
Yeah.
So what happened? So I can see why you got your DNA test. What happened when you got your results?
Okay, on October 6th, my wife and I were both working from home due to the whole COVID thing last year. And I wound up opening my results early in the morning. And the first thing I noticed was that, what I didn't notice, I should say, was the countries of origin. Nothing came from Holland and Germany. So that was a red flag right there. And then the good news is I happened to see on some of the DNA matches, I saw my uncle and my cousin on my mom's side. So I thought, well, okay, that answers that. I know for sure that I'm my mom's son. So that was, at least that kind of took the whole theory of being switched at birth or something out of the equation. But then reality started to hit when I saw a close relative match come up. And this person's name did not look familiar whatsoever. And I noticed I went back to the origins and noticed that, wow, this is showing France and Quebec. So at that time, I think I just was kind of in a state of shock. So I went back to the DNA match, that close relative match, and looked up our shared matches. And at that time, I was just blown away because almost every second, third, fourth cousin was coming up with all these French surnames. And so after that, I basically just I was shocked. I was surprised, but not surprised. I know it's kind of hard to describe how you can be both at the same time, but I think it put a lot of those doubts to rest. But also, it was also unbelievable that this was happening at the same time. So, I obviously had a job to do that day. So my wife and I went up just, getting our work done that day. And then after work, we started doing our own research with the DNA matches that popped up. And we saw a common surname that just kept appearing. And so we just started doing our research with it. And we come across the one third cousin, I believe, that had quite an extensive tree. So we started focusing on his family tree. And again, that same surname kept popping up, and it kept going all the way back to the 1800s. And so, we just kept doing our own research there for a while. And that research included everything from, they started looking at obituaries, everything we could find, with that last name. But at the time, even though it hit me that, oh my goodness, Ray is not my biological father, I was so focused on this close relative. It was a female. And my instant theory was, oh my gosh, she could be a half sister. And if I can backtrack a little bit, growing up, I always wanted a sister. And I'm not sure why, but there was just something about having a sister that just appealed to me. And so my focus was on her and trying to locate her. And I noticed on her profile that she hadn't been signed in to Ancestry in well over a year. And she didn't do a family tree. And so there was very, very minimal information to go on. And so I just started looking up, everybody on social media with that same name. And so the focus was on finding her first. And, I wasn't getting anywhere. I did message her on Ancestry, but again, with her not being signed in for quite a while, I just figured that was kind of a lost cause. So then in turn, I wind up just messaging just about every second, third, and fourth cousin I could possibly do so on Ancestry. And then the same way with Facebook, I would just get on anyone that had, those similar names, I would just start messaging. And so that went on for quite a while. And then, like a week or so. And then somehow, and to this very day, I can't really recall exactly how I did so, but I come across the DNA group on Facebook and kind of told, my scenario, what was going on, and was looking for some assistance. And one gentleman told me that he sent me a private message, and he said, you need to join this NPE group. And of course, like many of us who never experienced this before, it's like, well, what the heck is an NPE? So he explained what was going on. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Then, of course, it's obviously a very private group, and I kind of kid about it, but I felt like I was, interviewing for the FBI to get into this group, but and rightfully so, because I can completely understand. There's a lot of sensitive material to it, and I think just to have that confidence that you can feel comfortable talking to others about all this without this leaking out to anyone was definitely understandable. So anyway, I wind up joining that group, and then it kind of snowballed from there. Fortunately, a lady who, again, I had no idea what a search angel was. She reached out to me and said, hey, if you don't mind, I've been happy to help you out with this. And of course, I jumped on that offer right away. And so I pretty much kind of gave her everything I knew as far as the information that I'd, discovered since October. And, a little background on, both my family history. So she started doing her work, and, would message every so often with questions. And she got to the point where she was making great strides with it. I think it was probably a few weeks into it that she thought, I'm pretty confident that I have this narrowed down to two gentlemen. And so I was just ecstatic, by then. It's like, I may know who my real father is at that point. So, we just kind of, focused on two individuals. And she had it boiled down to two things for her, what was holding her back. She said that she noticed that I had some Italian in me as well. And she couldn't figure out where that was coming from, because there were, so much of everything boiled down to, French ancestry on this paternal side. So she questioned that. And then she said, well, I think this gentleman was in the Army and during the Vietnam era as well. And it made sense to her that, perhaps, he may have been in Fort Rucker, Alabama, but we needed to confirm that as well.
And I'll just put in a plug right now. In case anyone is listening, and we talk about it a lot, but you're talking about using a search angel. And so I'm just going to put in a plug for them, and I'll put in the show notes as well. The DNA search angels, these are volunteers who volunteer their time. They have gotten really good at looking at centimorgans and shared matches, family trees, and they can help you through doing research. And they've looked at family trees so much, they can help you kind of narrow down who your potential biological father is. So I'll put that resource out there for anyone who may need some assistance in trying to figure out got trying to figure out who certain siblings or biological parents are. So you, Will, had the search angel had narrowed it down to two gentlemen, and you said probably needed to be someone with a connection with the Fort. You called it Fort Rutgers in Alabama. That's where you were born.
The Fort Rucker, Alabama Army base. So if I can backtrack just a tad bit as well, some people are probably wondering, well, why didn't you just go to your parents and ask this? And at that time, unfortunately, there was a lot of family drama, if I can say the word. And it was past the point where I could actually just feel comfortable even opening up to my mom and asking questions. So I kind of went a backdoor route and started asking my aunts, her sisters. And matter of fact, I actually asked Ray's sister and sister-in-law some questions too, just trying to get a feel for what was going on back in that time frame. So they were not very forthcoming in some regard, at least on my mom's side. Now, Ray's sister and sister-in-law, to my surprise, told me that, they always kind of suspected that things weren't right back then because of just the timing. Evidently, when Ray came back home from Vietnam and was stationed in Alabama, they were just quite surprised that, he was there like a month. And then before you know it, hey, I'm getting married. And from what I understand, he probably arrived back in the States in March and then gets married in the middle of April. So, again, I couldn't, really talk to my mom about any of this. So, fortunately, I had to do everything on my own until that wonderful search angel came into play. And then she just, was so helpful and so beneficial to it all. So then the search angel was able again to narrow it down to, having an Italian heritage, and she was trying to figure that out. Well, she did find a gentleman who was from the East Coast, and that his mother was actually a War II bride from Italy, from Naples, Italy. So she goes, I think I am 99% confident this is the man we're looking for. The only thing we need to do now is to figure out if he was at Fort Rucker during that time frame. And so she wound up figuring out who his sisters were or are. And unfortunately, she found out that who his widow is. So unfortunately, while she figured out who my biological father is, unfortunately, he had passed away 5 years prior to my discovery. So in turn, she said, reach out to his sisters and his widow and see if they can confirm that he was stationed in Fort Rucker, Alabama during that time frame. So we did. When I say we, my wife, to me, it made more sense for my wife to reach out to her because, for one, some strange guy out of nowhere is approaching, a widow, 1,000 miles away and asking, hey, was your husband in Fort Rucker, Alabama? So, my wife, I should give her a plug here real quick, who has been amazing through this whole thing. She reached out to, my biological father's widow and through Facebook Messenger. And ironically, this was just a horrible day, but it turned out to be great at the end. But so the day that she did, it was probably around the middle of November. And that day, my wife went out for lunch. She was back working at the office at that time, and she went out for lunch and unfortunately had a car accident. So, it was already a bad day to begin with. And we were assisting, we were assisting my son he refinanced his home. So we had to be up. He lives a half hour away from here, so we had to be up to his house to meet him to get all that finalized. Well, while my wife thought it was just structural damage to her car, when she wound up driving after work up on the highway, unfortunately her car overheated. We wind up having to pull off on the side of the road and wait for a tow truck. And in the meantime, it's just pouring down rain. The tow truck gets there, and I wind up going out, to meet the truck driver. And, he and I are out there talking, and all of a sudden my wife rolls down the window and says, "Oh my gosh, I got a message." And so it was the Facebook Messenger response. And the lady reached out to Patty, my wife, and said, "Yeah, my husband was stationed in Fort Rucker, Alabama. Why?" So my wife proceeds to tell her that, well, my husband is trying to locate a close relative and trying to make a connection here. So they wind up just exchanging emails, and then we get home that evening, and my wife and my father's widow wound up exchanging photos. And because at that point, my wife had explained to her that, what the search agent had found, and, what we kind of suspected, that, maybe he was my father. And so they started exchanging photos. And Lily, the first time I saw a photo, I was just blown away. After 50 years of not really seeing resemblance, even on my mom's side, and definitely not seeing any resemblance on, my birth certificate father's side, I was just blown away seeing, a man that I just resembled so highly, and I was just blown away by the whole thing. So, they wind up just talking some more about the whole situation, and then his widow wind up saying, "Well, tell you what, let me contact his three sisters tomorrow and let them know what the discovery is and kind of go from there." So she did. She reached out to the three sisters the next day, and that next evening she wound up calling us, telling us that, well, I broke the news to the three of them, and one of them is all set to do a DNA test right away. So she sent off for an ancestry test practically the next day, and they were ecstatic. I mean, it was, I wasn't sure what to expect because I'm throwing this at them out of nowhere, obviously, and and especially with their brother, passing away 5 years earlier. I just didn't know what to expect. But fortunately, they were very welcoming and very receptive to it all. And so we wind up just connecting right off the bat, and it was just amazing there. Those first few weeks of getting to know them. And now, granted, I'm in Indiana and they're in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And matter of fact, one of the other aunts are down in Florida. So, it's kind of a long distance relationship there at the beginning, but, it was just amazing.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. So you've been in touch with your three aunts.
I have, yes. So in December, I wanted to find out from my mom, what all transpired back then. And at the same time, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, gee, did my birth certificate father know? I mean, because I had no idea, what all happened back then. And I thought, well, my gosh, maybe he doesn't even know that I'm not his biological son. So I was, treading on some, shaky ground there for a bit. And knowing that my mom wasn't speaking to me at the time anyway, it made matters even worse. So on a Saturday, the 1st of December, I decided, okay, I need to, I found all this information out. I need to confront my mom. So I called and, Ray answered the phone, and I said, well, I really need to talk to mom about something. Is she willing to talk to me? And he said, no. And I said, well, it's really important. And he said, well, maybe let's, maybe call back closer to Christmas. So I said, no, I said, I need to talk about this now. And so seeing how my mom wouldn't talk to me, I thought, well, I'm just going to have to, bring this subject matter up to him. So I said, well, as you know, a couple years ago, I was doing some ancestry research, and I said, is there something you guys need to tell me? And he was just silent. And I just had a gut feeling right then and there that he knew. And so I asked again, I said, is there something you guys need to tell me? And he proceeded to say, well, do you really want to know? And I said, of course I really want to know. I mean, that's why I'm calling. And he said, well, and I'm just going by his version of what happened back then. He said that, I met your mom, and she was pregnant. He tried to explain to me how, back in that time frame, that time period, an unwed mother wasn't very, very popular. So even with their own family, and evidently my mom was kind of shunned from her family at that time. So he claimed that she really didn't have anyone to turn to, and that he took it upon himself to, help her out. He said, I knew your dad, and by that time I was just, stunned. And he said, yeah, your dad and I were over in Vietnam together. We, we're in the same Army platoon. Matter of fact, he was my platoon sergeant. But your dad came back to the States earlier than I did. Evidently at that time, I think my mom and my biological father, Al, I'll just refer to him by his first name right now, to make things clear. They were an item for a few months, evidently, but then this is where it's a little unsure for me, because my biological father, Al, is not here to give his side of the story. And I'm just going by what, I was told. So evidently, Al had to go, he had a 30-day leave. So he went back home, and Ray told me that evidently he just wanted to, my mom didn't have anywhere to go. So he decided to, help her. And that's kind of where things ended as far as that story, because after that, they wind up, meaning Ray and my mom wind up getting married, some weeks later. And then, they resided in Alabama until he was discharged. And then, they moved back home to his home in Indiana. So, I just don't know what to think of all that, as far as, unfortunately, like I said, Al doesn't have an opportunity to give his side of the story.
Yeah, you don't know the full story because, Al is no longer around. Do you think anyone ever told Al your mom was pregnant with you?
I didn't until now, around March of this year. Out of nowhere, my mom calls me, and this is the only time she ever spoke of any of this. And she wasn't, she was fairly intoxicated when she called, and I hate to say that because I feel like I'm disrespecting my mother, but at the same time, she basically started telling me that I got what I wanted, meaning because I found this information out. And she stated that she did um, tell Al that she was pregnant. But, I think the only thing I took away from that conversation was the fact that she actually acknowledged everything that I have been, wondering I needed to hear from her for the last 4 or 5 months up until that point. And so I took the positive of her actually acknowledging it. And after that phone conversation, again, we didn't talk for a while. And I just, at that point, just figured, okay, I have my information at this point, and I just kind of let it go. In the meantime, my focus was the new family and getting to know them. And so I wound up just developing, such great relationships with them. And matter of fact, back in June, my wife and I wound up going out to Rhode Island and Massachusetts to visit a lot of the new family. And in that regard, it's been totally amazing. But on the downside is that I may have gained a new family, but I pretty much have lost another family because my mom's side of the family at first was, kind of supportive of, or at least I felt like they were supporting me and my, side of things in this whole story. Then something happened a little later on that caused them to pretty much, just block me from their lives as well.
Mm. Oh, that is so sad. I'm sorry. I understand that estrangement from your original family and how painful that is. And I even hear you calling your father that raised you, your birth certificate father, you call him Ray. I've noticed that. Have you always done that?
No, I have not. I just never really felt that close to him. And, but at the same time, ironically, I think with all this coming to light, um, he and I have developed actually a really good relationship here recently. I think the fact that the burden of him carrying the secret for 50 years was finally lifted from him, and I think it gave him just a tremendous amount of relief. And so he and I are actually on better terms now than ever, actually. And but he told me that he always felt like this was my mom's place to tell me. So, and I can respect that from him, and I respect the fact that he was willing 50 plus years ago to to take in a child that wasn't his and marry that child's mother. And they're still together to this very day. So I see things from a total different perspective when it comes to that now. So, and I just have a lot of respect for him as as a man and a father. So when I call him Ray, I basically do so just in order to clarify, telling my story to you, to differentiate between the biological and the birth certificate father.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Do your children know?
They do. Matter of fact, I told them about the first week that I found out. I mean, unfortunately, my daughter just got back from her honeymoon, and I had to throw this on her. But both my children were very supportive of it all. And, it was a blow to them too, because my, that's their grandparents. And, that was the grandfather, on my side that they knew. All in all, they've just been, tremendously supportive of the whole thing. And I couldn't ask for more from my own children. And I definitely, appreciate all of that from them.
And you say you had 3 aunts and you started to visit some family in June. Have you met your cousins then? I'm assuming your aunts had children.
Yes, I did. Matter of fact, I did meet a couple of my cousins. Very sweet. And we just constantly talk and, text and communicate. And then, so that's been just great, getting to know, the quote new family.
A side question, kind of going back to the beginning of the podcast today. How do you feel about being in the support groups and not, being one of, there's less men than women? And do you have any thoughts about that? And why do you think that is?
I totally enjoy being in the support groups. I mean, they've just been tremendous. Like I said, I've developed a lot of connections and friendships with so many. And as far as why, there's not very many men, I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm not sure if it's just, I hate to say, but, a lot of times, a lot of men just kind of keep all this stuff as an internal thing. And maybe that's one of the reasons. I'm not sure. But for me, it's been tremendous just to, connect with so many others and learn from their stories. And especially those rough months when you question everything about your own life and that others have, have had to experience this whole thing as well. And that's why I just think it's, tremendous for you to give us all this, this avenue. And I know for one, I appreciate it, and I know others do as well.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I mean, I'm right there with you, listening to other people's stories that I can nod along with and reading what other people are going through on the support groups. These are just, a few of the resources that I've used, and it sounds like you've used as well for our healing. I totally agree with you on that. And Will, if people want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Oh, sure. Through my email address is fine. It's willbenn@icloud.com. So WILLB as in boy, ENN @icloud.com.
Great. I will add that to the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing today. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to speak. I've seen you around the forums, and I'm so glad I actually got to hear your whole story today. So thank you, Will.
No, thank you for allowing me to do so. I appreciate it.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.